Hey, welcome to the Foster Fathers Podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm Kyle.
And this is a podcast all about foster care, adoption, and fatherhood.
We hope that you feel welcome. We hope that you feel that you belong. And we're glad that you're here to share this time with us.
Let's go.
All right, welcome back to Foster Fathers Podcast. This is episode 5.
Yeah, it is, dude.
I am Kyle.
I'm Chris. How are you guys? We're waiting, dude.
I don't think anyone's answering.
I hope you in the car responded.
I thought you actually felt that you were in the car with us, and so intently you thought, "Oh man, I should say something." Which actually, I got hit up by one of my old roommates. After last episode, and he said, "Hey, haven't heard from you." And honestly, I haven't heard from this guy in about 5 years. And he hits me up and he says, "Hey, I came across your podcast, and I just want to say that it's awesome. You guys did a great job, and it reminded me of the times that we would grab coffee together." So cool. It was kind of affirming that's our goal.
Style, dude.
Yeah. I mean, we hope this feels as natural as it can.
Yeah, so in today's episode, we want to talk through the first 72 hours of a foster care placement. We do want to be resourceful. We want to be helpful to people who are maybe diving into foster care. Yeah. And so if you maybe know someone diving into it, maybe send them this. But before we do that, we're doing another fun little segment here. Okay. Just a loving and stark reminder of foster care and adoption. So this week in foster care.
Foster care is?
This week, foster care and adoption is
4X swim lessons.
That's crazy. Is that like extra large?
No, it just means no. It means you're doing swim lessons for the first time times 4.
Yeah, at once.
And at once, yeah. And it's one of those things that I think typically you start. Your oldest goes through swim lessons, then your next one, then your next one. But for us, none of our kids had experienced swim lessons before, and honestly, not a lot of water exposure.
Sure.
I don't know what they got before us, but I know with us, we're kind of scared of water. So that created in me a lot of anxiety. I think my heart rate was probably 160. And just not knowing what their reactions were going to be. And it's just one of the, I think we talked to previously, foster care is unexpected. You can't prepare for it. Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that, all of a sudden you're doing swim lessons and you're doing four first time swim lessons at the same time.
And I want to say this nicely, and you know how much I love you. It sounds like a normal parenting experience.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody does. Most people do swim lessons, right? I think the difficult part is when you do it for the first time times 4.
Totally.
And our kids have. I mean, our bath time is a struggle at our house, and I think many kids don't like water getting dumped on their head, but our reactions to fear and scary situations seems to be much stronger than normal. And from my limited, trying to understand what's going on in these kids' heads, from the psychology and the neurobiology that I'm learning in The Body Keeps the Score. It's taken me a few weeks to get through that book, slow reader. But he does talk about how, your fear response can either be much larger, much higher, to those exposure to those circumstances, or can just be irrational. It's just seemingly so much more irrational that it's not a standard response, because your neural pathways and all your other, their brain's context for everything seems so much more, seems blown out of proportion. Sure. And so the fear for me was the fear that they may experience going in, which actually was much less. I think they were all excited enough. But, the fear was, when it comes time to do something scary, how are they going to react? And I found myself to be more of a control freak.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the expectations we talked about last episode.
Right. You have to just let things go and roll with the punches. But instead I find myself fighting that and trying to take control of most of these situations. But yeah, foster care is, doing first time swim lessons 4 times at once.
That the craziness that would be, the reality of not knowing how they respond has to be so hard.
Yeah.
And that ambiguity you're living in, that tension, the unknown is difficult to navigate. So all right, I'll give it to you.
It was hard. It was especially, early on. Why are these kids freaking out about some of the smallest input? And then I understand that it's because their brains have been rewired to abnormal.
That's crazy.
Tendencies. So yeah. All right, let's jump in.
Okay, here we go. Okay. All right, so 72 hours as okay, so the
first 72 hours.
Okay, you go for it.
As a foster parent or as with a new placement.
Okay, so sorry. Start there.
Yeah. The first 72 hours.
Yeah. Like I said, we want to be a resource. We want to be helpful. And so let's maybe share some of our own experiences.
Yeah.
And then something that I think looking back, if we were sitting across the table from a buddy who was about to dive into their first placement, what would you say to them? And so for me, my experience was...
How many placements have you had?
We've had, in a way, 3, and then a respite case.
Yep.
So, but for us, our main primary case, the one that we're still walking through with the same birth mom, we had a 2-year-old come in and an 8-year-old come at the same time, and that was it's a wild experience.
8-month-old.
Yep. And so I remember
not 8-year-old.
Oh, sorry, 8-month-old.
Just for those of our friends at home.
Yeah, I'll start over. So my experience was an 8-month-old and a 2-year-old older brother.
Right.
And I remember on a Fridays are my day off. I remember getting these kids and like the social worker, caseworker dropped them off, and it was like, and I was almost like, don't leave yet. It's like, here's their stuff, here's their things, this is kind of what we know. And I was like, yeah, come on in, take a seat. Like, you gonna
tell me more?
You got a couple hours? Like, let's like, and I was a little bit blown away and maybe prepared for this. The drop off is gonna be quick.
Yeah,
and it was a very like, okay, here's everything you need to know. Here's everything we know. Here's my number.
Yeah,
I'll probably pick up if you call.
Yeah,
but here you go. See ya.
Yeah,
and that was a moment where I was like, okay. What were your first moments?
I just wanted to pedal back. I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm working on not interrupting, but what were they dropped off with?
We actually still have the stuffed animals that our daughter now it's some stuff that like maybe mom had knit incarcerated, and some honestly, I was actually taken aback. It was just dirty clothes. It was all actually very dirty clothes. And it was...
came with them,
Yeah, in their situation, they came out of a situation, like they got brought into care, into another situation that was really rough.
Yeah.
Ended poorly, tragically, really, and then right to us. And so in that, the first thing I did was threw their clothes in the laundry. And there really wasn't much. Thankfully, we had a son a little bit ahead, so we had some backup clothes. But the 8-month-old's a girl, we didn't have any of that really. So pretty quickly on, we're going to stores, hitting up friends, and getting some stuff. But I was really taken aback at those first initial moments of, okay, here they are. Yeah, we've talked about this. We've talked on the phone. They're here. Here you go.
Yeah.
And we'll walk through the rest of the stuff, but let's just run parallel.
I'll actually focus on our second placement, because I think that's the more standard placement. Okay. Our first little girl came actually from her aunt and uncle, and it didn't look like that was a sustainable situation. Sure. So we actually would babysit her in a sense, and as she could grow accustomed to us until we just said, okay, she's good. And she came to stay the night, and, but she came with clothes. We kind of we had diapers, we had everything prepared. But when our second placement, our 2 kiddos, the younger 2 of the 4 set that we're adopting, I I got a phone call. It was Labor Day Monday or Labor Day Tuesday, the Tuesday after Labor Day.
Okay.
Sorry.
Labor Day is always a Monday.
Labor Day, the Tuesday after the Labor Day. We got a phone call. We were supposed to be getting a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And that 2-year-old actually got kept by the temporary placement that kid was staying with. And then they call us and said, 3 hours later, hey, we have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old.
So there's a lesson in there. Be flexible.
Be flexible. Right. Yeah. Which is great. I'm glad you highlighted that, because that is going to be
a common theme.
That's going to be the theme of this. What does it take to get through the first 72 hours?
Yeah.
Patience and flexibility. But we got a call, and actually these kids had gone in to stay with a temporary placement as well, all 4 of them. And I just said, okay, let me know when and where, and went and picked them up, which fortunately we had an extra car seat on hand, and then the state had provided this temp placement with another car seat. So then we had the state, right, and I mean, I don't know how I would have gotten them home without it. Would have probably drove to the nearest store, Walmart or whatever that sells them. But they had one change of clothes.
Wow.
The clothes they were wearing, and one change of clothes, one pair of shoes, no personal belongings. They came out of a drug house.
Wow. Whoa.
So their personal belongings were they were pulled away and contaminated. So fortunately, the little girl we had at the time was 3.
Yeah.
She was still in diapers.
Yeah.
Just barely turned 3, still in diapers, not quite potty trained. So we did have some diapers available.
Sure.
Because that would have been the first stop, was we have to have diapers to get these kids through. I mean, clothes, they can exist in one pair of clothes for a day.
Sure.
So that was the first 24 hours, was getting home, and just trying to be normal. And I actually remember the little boy was so scared. He was so scared. And he clung to me for the rest of the evening. The 2 little girls kind of bonded right away, still our friends. But when we put him down to bed, and then Jessica, my wife, came home, and he actually was kind of scared of her at first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is funny, because now, actually, he will ask him, who's your favorite? And he'll point at Jessica.
That's funny.
But that first
no, that's absolutely
that first reaction to her, was a little bit of fear.
Well, as we talked to this episode, I asked my wife, the smarter of the 2 of us, what she would say in those moments.
Not even close.
Yeah, it's great.
Sorry, was that out loud?
It's true. But one of the first things she said, and this is probably a hard thing to hear, especially if you live in a very structured home, is that just not only, like, for lack of a better term, abandon routine and, like, relax on the rules.
Yeah.
And that's something that, especially if you have kids in your own home, like, I would say recalibrate those first few hours. And this is our experience. I guess we should also caveat with the fact that we've had young placements.
Right.
We haven't had, 10 plus old placement. So there's definitely things that we are naive to in that sense. Yeah. But in our experience in receiving a placement, relax on the rules for a day or so. And, the goal is connection, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The goal is you're safe.
The temp placement that we had 3 girls for a week and just over a week. And I mean, it was kind of forced to be this way, because I picked them up at 6:30 at night. But I'm picking them up, and we have our little 3-year-old. And by the time we kind of complete the exchange, the transfer, I don't know what you call it. It was after 7. Then we had to stop and get some. For those girls, they didn't have some of the basics, so we actually stopped at the store on the way home. And then I got to a point where I said, it's already late, but they have to eat. We pull into a fast food restaurant, which is something we try to. I mean, we try to limit, but also like it was late. Our little 3-year-old.
It's out of your reality.
Yeah, our little 3-year-old was an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. By the time we got home, she was 2.5 hours past. She's nearly fallen asleep, but she's so excited. She's got 3 older sisters all of a sudden.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to say to be flexible is absolutely right, because I mean you have to make it work, and getting uptight. This is something I'm still learning. Again, take my advice with a grain of salt. I mean, it's easy. I'm trying to take my own advice as well. Be flexible, be willing for things to go wrong. And make the most of it.
Yeah, and it's corny.
Yeah.
So you'll laugh at me with this. But working with students for a long time in my career, the adage that goes, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
I think that goes a long way in foster care. Right. And that goes a long way in in our case, young kids, in my case specifically, nonverbal babies, really. Right. It's not saying, I really care about you, so now you can, but it's providing, it's like, here's food, here's safety, here's fun. We have a slide.
Kids have especially an 8-month-old child has no logical reasoning. Yeah. It's all feelings. So you have to create that feeling of comfort and safety.
Yeah, so once that is established, over the rules, over the routines, over, if we are in this home for a long period of time, there's a bedtime. There are things that we eat that we choose to eat as a family. There are times and rhythms that we expect you to keep up with.
But
for those first 72 hours, like, to know that doesn't matter right now. It's secondary to the connection that you have to establish.
So that's the first, let's say day one. That's day one. Go to sleep, wake up. What does day 2 look like?
Man, I'm sure that has to do. Day 2 looks a lot like unknown, because there's the fight or flight response where they are going to do whatever they're going to try and adapt, but then later you may realize that some other issues are coming to light now that they maybe let their hair down a little. Maybe they maybe start to further grasp what's happening. Right. And I don't know.
Yeah, the 2 when we got them, I think that first day they were just glad that somebody was there. Someone was there to capture their fall.
In your situation too, that's absolutely true.
But once they got into that felt safety, it was once they got through that felt safety, they felt comfortable enough to start freaking out.
That's what I was about to say. It's when they feel safe that you're going to start seeing the real stuff.
And that was one of the most confusing things for me, that I felt like we were making a ton of progress within the first couple months. And I remember one time I went and picked them all up from daycare, and I get them into the car and they just start crying and screaming at me and all of these things. And I had no context. I'm like, dude, what the heck? And I'm thinking, I'm getting better at this by the day, but their behavior is growing worse and worse. And somebody who has more experience with kids than me said, that's because they're growing comfortable enough to essentially let their guard down. That around people that they don't feel safe, they're going to behave in a way that they, can keep themselves safe. But when they feel safe, they're going to just start acting normal. And that was the most confusing thing to me. And then I started to see traces of that throughout. But initially I was...
So you're telling me the misbehavior is a compliment.
No, I don't think I see what you're trying to do here. I don't think we can blame all of our kids' misbehaviors on comfortability.
It's just,
but it is an okay sign, at least, especially in contrast to initially being uptight.
If you're listening to this in the context of I am certified,
what's the takeaway?
Licensed, like, okay, it's gonna foster care on a whole level is 2 steps forward, 3 steps back.
Yeah, it will get worse again, and then it'll get better again, and then it'll get worse again.
And I get that. Like I've shared in my story, like our 2-year-old case it was rough with our boy, and that didn't start for a few months, where things kind of got territorial. Things kind of got, that feeling of, this is my home, this is my rhythm, this is my routine. Okay, and now I can start to peel back some of these layers, because I mean, kids, no matter how young, they're not dumb. Yeah. They're not. They know maybe not what they're feeling per se, but they know they're reacting. Yeah, they're intaking, they're watching, they're learning, they're growing, and so the fact that day 2, you talk about what day 2 looks like. Not that you'll see all that per se, like the response. You will begin to see it, and that will unfold. But I also think day 2 is probably resourcing. Day 2 looks like store runs and getting what you need to get, and
finally connecting with your caseworker to get the information that you didn't have on day 1.
Yes, and silly parameters.
Some of that stuff they don't have the information.
Well, they got to establish doctors. You got to establish. Oftentimes I believe with a new placement they want to either establish a caregiver, or they want to like get checked in on the current caregiver. Yeah. But then also I want to say, and this is silly, and this flies probably in the face of who you try to be sometimes, and I don't mean that negatively. That sounded weird. But like when you go I'm a gift giver, and so when we took the kids to get clothes and stuff, and I saw a kid get excited, I wasn't trying to enable them to get whatever they want all the time, but like, hey, I'd love to buy you that. I'd love to get you that little truck or whatever you wanted.
Right. And that goes back to that feeling, creating I know when we got our older 2, we started by having them on the weekends. And again, not trying to entice them to like us, but what we were taught was create low pressure situations of high positive emotions. And so even though I especially for kids with behavioral issues, and inducing that, just giving them a ton of sugar. Yeah. But we did donuts. We did donuts, and we said yes a lot more to things that we don't normally do. Yeah. But every weekend for those first 5 or 6 weekends, when the older 2 were there, we would go and get donuts. And just because it gave them something to look forward to, it gave them a positive association with us. And so,
say that again. You said low pressure situations for high. Say that again.
Would it low pressure, high connectivity, high reward, high positive emotions. Yeah. Positive engagement.
Low pressure environments for high positive emotion.
Right.
That's brilliant, dude.
Yeah. I mean, under pressure, these kids are going to panic, and then that's what we saw on day 2, day 3 with our placements was they're now coming out of their shell. They're now letting down their guard a little bit. And then it just became a fear fest, of, oh, crap, what is going on? This is no longer fun. Yeah. This is no longer fun. This is scary. I'm with 2 strangers. So
that's good, man. Yeah. That's really great. So that's day 2. Let's say day 3. And this is all, it's situational.
Every situation will be different. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And depending on the age, depending on the trauma, they may be perfect for a while. Right. Because they're protecting. Right. And they're not there. Yeah. Or
you can't it's harder to hurt a turtle in its shell.
Man, you got them good ones,
dog. I just came up with that. I really just came up with that.
Wow, that's brilliant. But the also sad reality is that they may be waiting to move again. Yeah. And expecting that. And especially in situations like ours, we found ourselves with the idea of, hey, permanency is an option. Yeah. Long-term care is an option. We want to be a landing spot. That's a huge thing. Yeah. And to say, man, you're here for a while, and that's great. Yeah. So we said a few things. Resourcing. We said connecting, make time for connection. We also said just get ready for kind of paperwork, if you will, like in the sense that you have to keep straight who's where, daycares.
Yeah.
In our state, daycare is provided, so you got to find out the right. Not only a daycare that is accepts the state's help, but then also like in your neighborhood, stuff like that.
And I will say that, fortunately, our I had prepped our daycare because we already had one girl in foster care, so all of all of that was already covered, or was already set up.
Sure.
However, I had prepped the daycare to say, hey, and in fact that morning I said, hey, we're getting a 2-year-old. Can you guys make space? Yeah. And then it turns out we actually got a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they still very graciously did.
Yeah.
But that is something you have to think ahead on. Sure. Looking into that is a resource that you're going to have. And fortunately, I think most of those foster care programs, daycare programs that take state funding, state coordination, they have space built in to accommodate that if the need arises.
Let me take this a different direction here as we close up this episode.
Take it away.
And we know there's a myriad of different situations, relationship statuses, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But in those 72 hours where you're literally thrown into a tornado,
right?
How do you connect with your spouse? What do you need?
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
I mean, I really think being on the same page beforehand is great. I called Jessica and I said, hey, the 2-year-old's out of the question. She said, okay. And I called her back up, 2 hours, 3 hours later. And I was like,
guess what?
They have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. What do you think?
Yeah.
And being able to
invite them into the conversation.
Yeah, and just know that you're on the same page. You avoided a lot of that. There's definitely some questions in our minds of did we make the right decision, but trusting each other, trusting that you're on the same page. I mean, it sounds way more flowery than it actually is. I mean, there's definitely been a lot of finger pointing along the way. We're married like everybody else is.
Sure. Yeah.
A good marriage, but very, we inch our way through sometimes.
Yeah.
And but being on the same page initially, because everything else feels so reactive, and you don't have that time to really, your brain is still catching up to what you're experiencing. Yeah. So I would say the other, something else that, the flexibility, of course, patience.
Sure.
And by that, I mean, you're not going to have all the answers.
And you're not going to handle every situation perfectly.
Yeah. But you're not going to have, not all the details are going to be there. Not everything will be lined out. You have a lot of things to figure out.
Sure.
And your kids will react in ways that seem contrary to the inputs that you're putting in. You're trying to be extra loving, extra sweet, extra accommodating, and their reactions could be a whole variant of reactions. And you need to be patient to know that things will change, that things will settle in, they will get figured out over time.
Sure.
There is, like you said, you got to get this paperwork signed, you got to get this thing, and that is true. You have to get all of those things signed. We've missed a lot of deadlines.
Ooh.
And they're still they find ways to make that stuff work.
Those
are all guidelines. They're not hard fast rules.
Yeah, and I would say over communicate with each other.
Yeah,
and I think it's okay to say I need a break.
Yeah,
and walk out the room.
Yeah,
it's okay to have each other's back in that situation. Yeah. And the first 72 hours, and in the context that's coming, a situation that's coming up in my mind, some friends that they signed up for a short case. It's kind of become a long case, and they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, they just need to talk to each other, like, hey, get on the same page.
Yeah.
Take the time, take a breather. Do you need to go? Who do you need to go to a movie? What do you need? Those moments in the first 72 hours, although that may not look like I need to go away for the weekend.
Right.
Wait.
I'm going to be gone for the next 48 of these 72.
Yeah. But I was here, so no. But to just communicate, like, I need a break. And then also in my situation, just the grace. Like to say, hey, these situations are hard. They're unique. This is the first time we're experiencing these things.
Yeah.
And it's not always going to be perfect, and we're not always going to respond perfectly.
Yeah. I think something that Jessica and I have tried to do, because the reality is, you're right. I mean, the break that you want is not always going to be available. So you got to take what you can get. Sure. And for us, a lot of times that looks like, 45 minutes together in the evening. Rather than going out for a full 4-hour date or a movie or
sure.
It looks like, hey, we're going to do 45 minutes tonight. We're going to do 20 minutes tomorrow night.
Sure.
I'm going to give you your time away. You're going to give me my time away.
Sure.
But you have to make time for those, make space for those things. So,
well, that was the first 72 hours. Now, don't get me wrong. We probably didn't touch all of it.
I would love to also, we've only had a handful of placements each.
Yeah.
I'd love to bring someone who's been doing this for 15, 20 years.
Yeah. So. And also on the other side, if you are about to, or maybe you're about to sign in and you have a question and you're like, dude, send it in a comment or something. Yeah. And we'd love to just react to some of these things too. We're growing this thing, so you never know what.
Give us ideas, give us questions to answer. Help us to learn. We're both still learning. We can learn alongside you.
Absolutely. So, yeah, that's episode whatever this is now. I think 5. So there you go. All right, bro.
Thanks, guys.